One quiet, slow Shabbat morning in August, a beloved long-term member of our shul comes on a Saturday morning, comes into the sanctuary, and he says, "Rabbi, I just turned 93 years old. Is there any chance that I could get an Aliyah?" I said, "Of course, we'd love to give you an Aliyah. I just need you to know one thing. You are a youngster." "A youngster? How am I a youngster? I'm turning 93 today." I said, "Do you see that woman seated over there? She's seated with her children and grandchildren and mishpacha." "Yeah, I see her." "Well, she is turning 103. And she is taking an Aliyah today for her 103rd birthday." Without skipping a beat, he says, "Is she single?" That's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about the good stuff. I want to talk about the laughter and the lightness and the loveliness that have been so very hard to come by this year. As we all know, this has been a year of deep, deep heaviness. And as we all know, the heaviness is ongoing and expanding. Israel's wars are ongoing and expanding. Israel's losses are ongoing and expanding. Our heartbreak is ongoing and expanding. But we are not wired to live in heaviness indefinitely. And we cannot live in heaviness indefinitely. We crave hope, and we crave uplift. But how do you do hope in a world where there is still and every day so much heaviness in it? And how do you do hope when it sometimes feels like hope is gone? How do you do hope when it sometimes feels like hope is lost? Is there anything you can do? Is there anything I can do? Is there anything we can do to bring back hope in a world where there is still so much heaviness? And the answer to that question is definitely yes. Because I saw it myself and I experienced it myself. And when I did, it was beautiful and uplifting. But first, I need to tell you a backstory. Since 2016, I had lost my hope. For most of the last 8 years, I have personally lived without hope. And the reason is that in 2016, my mother died, and 2 months later, my mother-in-law died, and a year and a half ago, my father-in-law died. And Shira and I found ourselves in our early 60s orphans. And not having any living parents is just something we could never, ever get used to. But we all know what the consolation is when parents pass away. We all know what the consolation is when one generation passes. And the consolation is another generation coming into being. As the book of Kohelet puts it, Dor holech v'dor ba. One generation passes away. One generation dies. But another generation comes into being. Another generation is born. And when that happens, when our parents die, but we get to hold a cutie pie little grandchild, there is total healing in that. After all, that's the deal. After all, that's the system working. Nobody gets to live forever. And so when our parents die, but our grandchildren are born, and the carousel turns, that's just life. That's just the human condition. And then what a privilege it is to be able to transmit values from generation to generation. But what happens when Kohelet is not fulfilled, when Kohelet is inverted? Dor holech, v'dor lo ba. One generation passes and another generation does not come into being. What happens when we have dead parents and no grandchildren? That was where Shira and I have lived for the last 8 years. And one day, as this was weighing on me always, I said to my father-in-law, Dad, I'm just so sad. I'm just so sad that we don't have grandchildren that could have been named after our mothers. And my father-in-law was so wise, and he was so loving, and he was so very crusty. I'll never forget what he said. What he said is, not every blessing is given to every person. Ooh. Wow, that was a lot. Not every blessing is given to every person. And it's one thing when that's theoretical truth. But what happens when the person to whom that blessing is not given is me? So I had a lot of work to do for the last 8 years. And the verse that I held onto the most is in Psalm 30 in our Shacharit service every morning at Gann Chapel. Ba'erev yalin bechi v'laboker rina. At night, tears dwell, but joy comes in the morning. And I just loved that verse. I loved how lyrical it was. I loved how uplifting it was. I loved how hopeful it was. I loved how the psalmist promises us that night does not last forever. I loved how the psalmist promises us that morning will come, and when it does, it will bring joy. I held on to that verse for dear life, but over 8 years, still no grandchildren. And as I was communing with this verse every morning in my prayers, I came up with 3 facts, 3 points of the human condition that I was thinking about all the time, which went under the letters ACL. A, avoid the comparison trap. Do not fall into the comparison trap. Shira and I are blessed to have many friends who are blessed to have many grandchildren. And we are so happy for them. And that did not happen to be our blessing. But as Andy Stanley put it so memorably, there is no win in comparison. There is no win in comparison. Don't go there. Which leads to the second, the C. Count our blessings. Everyone has blessings to count. We all have blessings to count. Counting our blessings is always a good thing. And strengthening our blessing counting muscle is always a healthy practice. That's A, that's C, L. Let go of the stuff that we can't control that just causes us pain. Let go of the stuff that we can't control that just makes us feel bad about our lives. In part, because maybe when we let go, those elusive dreams will, in their own way, in their own time, land on our shoulder like the butterfly when we've stopped trying so hard. But more to the point, even if that never happens, what is the point of panting after something that we have absolutely no control over? So just let it go. So every day at Minyan, I would think of these points. And it was okay. It was all right. It was better than nothing. But I sensed that I was missing something. I sense that even after 8 years, I still did not get this verse. Because the psalmist says, tears dwell at night, but joy comes in the morning. And I wanted to ask the psalmist who wrote that, when will morning finally come? How long do we have to wait to see the morning light? And by the way, psalmist, what if morning does not come? What if morning never comes? Might we have to be resigned to live in a perpetual night? I knew that I was missing something. I knew I hadn't gotten that psalm yet. But I didn't know what I was missing until August 22nd and August 23rd of this summer. On August 22nd, our sons, Nat and Davide, were in the labor and delivery room of a hospital in Eugene, Oregon, along with their surrogate, an angel named Bethany, and her husband, just the loveliest guy, such a mensch, named Mackenzie. And the four of them were in the labor and delivery room when Bethany gave birth to our granddaughter, to our son's daughter. Now, Nat and Davide had told us, hey, listen, Mom and Dad, you know, when our baby is born, we might need some time to just bond with the baby. And we might need some time to kind of get used to being a family of three. We said, of course, of course. Take all the time. Which is why we didn't get there until the next day. We were, of course, on a 7 a.m. from Logan to Oregon the next day. And we walked in to the room, and there we saw all these beautiful things. We saw our sleeping granddaughter, whom I had pined away for 8 years, and who was indeed named after our beloved departed parents. And I saw our sons, who at 35 became fathers. And I saw Bethany, who made it all possible. And when I did, this is a little bit sick, I admit, but when I saw this scene, I could only think about one thing, which is a sermon that Harold Kushner gave many years ago. Harold Kushner gave this sermon at his son Aaron's bar mitzvah. Aaron had progeria and was gravely ill. At the time of his bar mitzvah, he would go on to pass away from progeria a few years after his bar mitzvah. And this is the sermon Rabbi Kushner gave on the bima at his son Aaron's bar mitzvah, at his dying son Aaron's bar mitzvah. And here's the question Rabbi Kushner asked. It's such a big and important question. How do we bring redemption into this broken world? I mean, the world is so broken, and the world has so much pain, and the world has so much loss, and everybody is carrying heartache and heartbreak. How do we bring redemption to the world? And the category that Rabbi Kushner uses in his sermon is a category that's in the Talmud, in the Tractate Sanhedrin, the category of Messiah. And the Talmud teaches that a Messiah is going to come and bring redemption to the world. And Rabbi Kushner's question is, what do we do to bring on the redemption? And I'll never forget his answer. His answer has stayed with me for 30 years. His answer is religion on its best day. And his answer, what do we do to bring on the redemption, is what I thought about when I saw Bethany. Here's his answer. What do we do to bring on the redemption? How do we bring the Messiah? Rabbi Kushner's answer is that no one, nobody can be the Messiah for the whole world and bring redemption to the whole world. That is not happening. And then Rabbi Kushner said, most of us, most of the time, cannot even be the Messiah for our own world. All too often, we can't bring redemption to our own lives. But, he said, every person, everybody can be the Messiah for somebody else. Everybody can bring redemption to the life of somebody else. And his charge at his son's bar mitzvah was go out and be the Messiah for somebody else. Make somebody else's life better. You can't solve the world. And all too often you can't solve your own problems. But you can be the Messiah for somebody else. And I saw Bethany. And here Bethany was a total stranger to us. We didn't know her, she didn't know us, and she was the Messiah to our family. She brought redemption to our family. How could we ever thank her for being pregnant for 9 months to give our sons a daughter? All we had to offer was our gratitude. So I wrote a long personal letter, actually more of a sermon, maybe more of a high holiday sermon, and I gave it to her in the hospital. Now, Bethany and Mackenzie live with their 3 sons and their parents and a grandmother, all in the same home in Oregon. 4 generations under one roof. And they have dinner together every night, which meant that our granddaughter, while she was in utero, heard the chatter of a family dinner every night, generations asking each other about their day. Which means that we had to thank Bethany not only for bringing our granddaughter into the world, but for teaching her what's most important about life before she was even born. Because that's what's most important in life. Family, time, family dinner, asking and really caring about how was your day, checking in every day. That's the whole thing. Everything else is commentary. And we said in that note to Bethany that we would spend the rest of our lives trying to emulate her grace in all of our encounters with other people. So I have on my desk a framed photograph of Nat and Davide and Bethany holding the baby, and it serves as a helpful reminder to me. And I needed it, and I need it, and I will need it. That hope that is lost can be found again. And that hope that is gone can be restored again. And it serves as a helpful reminder that all of us here, every one of us here, has a role to play in creating a more hopeful world. Most of us are not going to be surrogates like Bethany, but everybody can do something to help somebody have a better life. Everybody can do something to help somebody move from the darkness of an endless night to the joy of a brand new morning. So here's my invitation, my spiritual invitation to all of us in this new year. Help at least one person. Help at least one person who has lost hope find hope again. And if we can do that in that way, we will make our world a more hopeful world. One person at a time. Go out and find your somebody else. Find somebody else and bring them to the joy of a new morning.